titled Advice on How to Read in a Foreign Language. And we are streaming on YouTube, apparently. Okay, so Anna, please.
All right, people, so let's go. It's just we are in the same environment, so sometimes you're gonna hear my voice in Audio's computer, but this is just like the thing when you are a couple, right? So, well, you know me, I am another quater, right? And last class, which was our first class in a book a month of the open class series, it was with me, and now it's without us, so you get the opportunity to see how both of us teach, right? Because we are the two teachers of a book a month. And I was the one who started the company. I am I'm a teacher. I'm also a researcher. I have in the last year, which was the year when Audio joined us as a professor, as a teacher in a book a month, it was my year of doing my postdoc. I was doing this postdoc, which is a collaboration between German institutions and Latin American institutions, which was financed by the University of Cologne, and it's based in São Paulo. So we were living in São Paulo after that year. And it was an interdisciplinary postdoc, mostly, in my case, it was mostly focused on literature, right, and comparative literature. My PhD is also in comparative literature. I've done the basis of it in the Federal University of Paraná, but I've also done an exchange program in Germany, in Berlin. And my master's was completely abroad, right? I did multi-institutional Erasmus Mundus Master, which started in Lisbon, in the Nova University of Lisbon, and then I moved to England, to the University of Sheffield. For all of you who don't know the city, because it's the smallest city in the north of England, it's actually the city of the Arctic Monkeys. Have you ever heard of this beautiful band before? This is where they also Def Leppard. If you like metal, Def Leppard and Arctic Monkeys are from Sheffield, right? Is in the same line of Manchester. And then I ended up in Spain, in the University of Santiago de Compostela, right? While Audio, I think that all of you have heard of him before, not only as a teacher of a book a month, but also as the podcast host of Literatura Viral. Probably some of you have reached a book a month through Literatura Viral. And he is, well, what happened with the PDF? Nothing. Okay, all right, so sorry. So he's just like, he has done his PhD in the University of Padua in comparative literature and medical humanities. And he has specialized in telling the literary history of the representation of cholera in his PhD. And also he has done his master's in the same kind of multi-institutional program as I. So he studied in the University of Bologna in Italy, then in France, in the University of Strasbourg, and then in the end in Greece at the University of Thessaloniki. Right. So for those of you who are fans of Literatura Viral, tomorrow we have a new episode, right? So if you are wishing to hear the third season, you're going to be very excited to hear about it. Literatura Viral is then his podcast. It has started in the beginning of the corona pandemics, right? And is mostly dedicated to analyzing how the representation of illnesses and epidemics is performed in the arts and literature and music and other types of cultural expressions. And some of these episodes here, he has already analyze some of the authors that we have studied in a book a month previously. For example, Edgar Allan Poe, and also Philip Roth that we have here in the yellow part. And in this episode, in this bottom right, it's the one that I participate with him. So probably you have heard this one with both of us speaking, right? So move on, please.
Okay, guys. So after presenting to you our curriculum, just to prove that we know what we're talking about, I would have to tell you what a book a month is. In the case you don't know what it is actually, put it simply, it is a method to practice and improve language while learning about literature. Or if you want to put the other way around, we learn about literature, and as a collateral effect, as a second degree effect, we improve our language. Okay, and then the next question you might be asking is why? Why to do that? Why to study literature in a foreign language? Why not doing it directly in Portuguese as we do in high school, for example? And then I would argue that there are three groups of answers, three different areas of arguments that we could present, three advantages. Okay, so one direction is linguistic, obviously. Literature is authentic material. Literature is challenging in any language. Okay, so when you read literature in Portuguese, you feel challenged. And actually, if you want to make your Portuguese better, if you want to improve your language, your mother language, you will actually read, right? So the same thing applies to a foreign language. It expands your language awareness, and it goes way beyond learning a few words, learning vocabulary. Of course, you're going to absorb vocabulary by reading, but it goes way beyond that. It goes onto deeper levels of grammar, syntax, morphology, pragmatics, and etc. So there are many, and cultural awareness as well, right? And one great thing about expanding the language awareness is also that that happens in context, and which means that you absorb much more. It means you can go much further because you don't feel like studying, you feel like you're reading and having fun. So, and if you're having fun, if you're enjoying what you're doing, you are much more likely to do it more often and to do it for longer, right? And there are many studies in linguistics that show that once you learn something in context, especially when you're talking about language, it sticks. Okay, so you remember that. And that's very simple to when you learn how to sing a song in which there are many words that you do not know, okay, you will learn those words very fast. If you try to learn the same words in a list, like outside of a context, if you just like read it one after the other, it would be much more difficult. It is possible, but much tougher. Okay, so these are linguistic advantages, but there are also a lot of social advantages of doing that, because literature is motivating. Okay, it can be frustrating as well. Sometimes it's tough, but most of the time we read stuff that we like. We read things that we are interested in, right? So it is motivating and it keeps us going. And it also encourages interaction. I don't know if all of you will remember those days before social media. But actually, back then, it was difficult to meet people that had the same interest as you did, okay? So once you met someone in the bus, perhaps, that was reading the same book as you would become immediately instant best friends, okay? So literature encourages such interaction. And this is a very powerful tool in order to learn and to practice language. And another social advantage of literature is that it educates the whole person, right? So it will give you much more than the linguistics, but actually other levels. And this brings us to the third direction, which is intellectual, right? Literature is pretty much awesome and will offer you much on the realms of philosophy, anthropology, history, and so on. I won't I take that to be self-evident, so I won't even go too much to explore this direction too much. Okay, so this is why we think it's very interesting to combine foreign language and literary studies. And one thing that, before we go into the advice, the tips, one thing that I really want to highlight and to emphasize is that we do the talk and we walk the walk. So this is not something that we've learned in I don't know, like, you know, the coaches and in those things, you know, like Quantic. We haven't been hugging a few trees and then we learned this stuff. No, we have been doing this for years. And actually, what we practice in class, it's something that we do on a daily basis. Actually, we've been there and we are there to a very high degree. Anna speaks 5 languages. I speak 6. We are cheating a little bit because I'm counting Portuguese there. So those are not all foreign languages. You can detract one if you please. So we have been, and of course we're not. We are not 100% fluent in all of them. We speak all of them and we understand all of them into different levels, because that's normal. I mean, so we know how it is, the process, the difficulties, the challenges that we face in every single step of the way. We know them quite well, actually. We have been studying abroad. Anna has taken her master's in England and other countries, as she explained a few minutes ago. I pursued my PhD in the University of Padua in Italy. And before that, I took my master's also in Italy, in the University of Bologna. And so we have lived for extensive years abroad, and we have also written abroad, in a foreign language, sorry. My master's thesis was written in Italian, and my PhD thesis was written in English. So once again, writing in a foreign language it's quite a different thing. And it's an experience that really teaches you a few things about that. Anna, can you share with us your experience with Spanish, please?
Sure. Just asking if you can all listen to me, because now I'm traumatized. All right, cool, people. So the thing is, I don't know if this is a sentiment that all Brazilians might feel with Spanish, that we feel insecure of, like, being embarrassed of Spanish-speaking people speaking Portuguese or something like that, which I think at this point in life, we already recognize that Portuguese is another language, right? Probably yet to be recognized, but it's something that has, it's in the process, we have to say. But the thing is, I was always a little bit, I don't know, like I was always trying to improve my Spanish, but not very much into it. And well, and then there was the time that I was doing my master's in a Spanish-speaking country in Spain, right? In Santiago de Compostela, and I had to, right? So I had to, and in the beginning, I lacked effort, and in the beginning, I lacked interest, but then I fell in love with the language, with the culture, with the people, and I started doing my own thing. I never took formal classes in Spanish before, right? And this is the thing. I have always been a self-taught person when it comes to Spanish. I think with English a little bit as well, but I think with Spanish a little bit more. And I have at the time, like, employed myself into going to classes and attending all the classes in Spanish, speaking with my friends at the time, and also downloading all the apps and reading everything that I could in Spanish, so I could actually incorporate and embody the language and therefore be able to produce. So when I arrived in Spanish, everybody used to play with me that I would try to speak in English with the Spanish-speaking people, and they don't really speak English that much. It's not something that they do, that, at least in that region of Spain. And I was a little bit more silent for a month, and then suddenly everybody was just like, "Ah, she speaks." And suddenly I felt more comfortable in being able to speak Spanish with everybody. And then this is where the social part of the master's degree studied. And I am proud to say that last year I gave my first academic lecture in Spanish, and it was a success. Everybody understood me. So I'm glad that I have wrote this path, because it was sometimes arduous, right? And the same thing, I think it happens with German. But the thing with German, I have taken some formal classes before I moved to Berlin to do my PhD, right? I wanted to get ahead and to be able to go there, at least speaking a little bit. And when I moved to Berlin, I was about like pre-intermediate A2, right? If you get those terms. And I started trying to be like less self-conscious about German, and I would speak with everyone. In the beginning, it was traumatizing. I went to buy a ticket to go to an Incubus, the band concert, and the guy started laughing at me, and he changed to English, and it was like, no, you're not gonna change it. You're going to speak with me in German, even though it's broken German. Please do it. So I'm doing my best here. Just follow along. And then he laughed and he tried. And this is what I kept doing for this, the whole period that I was in Berlin. In Berlin, I didn't study because I was writing my thesis, so I didn't really have the time to do it. I spent most of my time writing and researching at the archive. But later on, when I came back to Brazil and I started the book a month, I think that this project actually started also inspiring other teachers to do the same kind of method with other languages. And this was what my friend Angelica, who's a very good friend of mine, studied with me in the university. She's a German teacher, and she elaborated a course that teaches short stories in German. And we would meet twice a week, right, to discuss the short stories. And I got to see, like, I got to make proof of how it works, right? I noticed a huge difference in my German in only 2 months of course. And for me, I think it was like the most beneficial part of studying German, right? Because I would see the language in context. And I also had fun because I was reading very interesting people, Nobel Prizes, some people who were very important for the history of language. So it was super great. So this is my story with German, and maybe Audio would like to share his story with German as well.
I'm not so sure because, you know, guys, life is too short to learn German, right? So I have studied a little bit by myself and have taken 2 semesters of German, but it's a language that I mostly read, and with at an intermediate level with quite a lot of difficulties, but it's something that I really do every now and then, because one day I would like to read Nietzsche and Schopenhauer in the original. So yeah, perhaps in like 20 or 30 years, but let's. And one thing that I have been doing though is a few years back, I've been to Barcelona, and I got a book about architecture, and I read it, and I understood, like I read 2 paragraphs and I understood everything. And then I was like, what the hell is wrong with this book? And actually the book, it was in Catalan. And since I speak French and Italian and Spanish, I could understand it, but it's in Catalan. It was also pretty funny and weird. And after that, I got really excited about Catalan, and so I started to study it. And I have combined that with our teaching in a book a month. So last semester, for example, our students were reading Agatha Christie's 5 Little Pigs. And you know, Agatha Christie is not so tough to read. And so I decided to get that in Catalan. I could not find it, so I got, and then there were none. Y aleshores también queda cap in Catalan. And so I read this in Catalan while our students were reading it in English, just to mimic the kind of difficulties that our students find themselves in. The same thing it's the same thing we're doing. And this was successful. And so after that, we were also reading The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante. She's an Italian author, but we read it in translation in English. And the same thing happened again. I came across this audiobook, La Filla Fosca, in Catalan. And so I decided to listen to it just to mimic the same kind of process. Okay, so we're saying that just to, and finally we get into the advice. Okay, sorry it took us so long, but I think these preliminaries are quite important actually. To prove to you that we do the talk, but we also walk the walk. Okay, so how to in a foreign language? I try to organize a few tips that I've given out to friends over the years, to our students. Then me and Anna, we talked a lot about this and got into a few of them. There are a few others perhaps that we also share in our courses. And I think one of the first things that we have to get flat straight at the beginning is that reading in a foreign language is about managing your expectations. Okay, you will understand less. That's a fact. Okay, you will read slower. That's also a fact. It's not your native language, and even in your native language, even in Portuguese, if you have to read a children's story, it's easier than Machado de Assis, which is easier than Guimarães Rosa. You know, so even in our own languages, depending on the type of text, depending on the type of author, your reading abilities will shift, and that's okay. Okay, and I think there's also another thing that we have to take into the equation is that our brains have been like bombarded with social media for quite a few years already. And I don't know about you guys, but nowadays I have the attention span of like a mollusk or I don't know, like an invertebrate for sure. Okay, so nowadays it's tougher and tougher, I feel, to concentrate on reading. Okay, so I feel that I myself read a lot, but still I feel that I have the impression I used to be a better reader in times of speed and understanding and concentration. So all of this play a role when we try to read in English, in Italian, in German, in French, whatever. Okay, so we have to manage our expectations. This brings us to the second tip. We should seek challenge. Okay, if you want to become Arnold Schwarzenegger, you won't do that by lifting soft stuff. You know, you have to lift heavy weights. You have to sweat. It has to be challenging. The things that, however, we have to be able to understand when something is challenging, but which gives you a nice percentage of difficulty. And sometimes challenging becomes too hard, becomes impossible, becomes self-beating. Okay, so we have to draw the line there. Something that is difficult enough to be challenging and to allow for personal growth, but not too hard, so hard that you actually give up and cannot really absorb anything and cannot get anything good out of it, only stress and anxiety. So if it's too hard, you have to understand why. Why is that? Okay, so perhaps vocabulary is old. You know, if you read Jorge Amado, is much easier than if you read Camões, which is much easier if you read, I don't know if you guys ever tried to read medieval Portuguese. It's quite an experience. I had to do it at college. And at some point you even think it's Latin or something because it's unrecognizable. It looks like another language. So the further back you go in time, the tougher it becomes. Of course, that is a general rule. It doesn't apply in all cases, but anyway. So if you try to read Shakespeare, obviously it's going to be much more difficult than reading something contemporary. Something a bit less self-evident, however, is informal language. Okay, when we hear informal Portuguese, it's quite easy to understand. But when we read or listen informal English or informal whatever, it's tough. Okay, so reading slangs, reading regional dialects, they are very difficult. So this could be at the root of the problem. For example, one simple example to you guys, to give to you guys, Steinbeck. okay? Amazing author, has been touched by the finger of God. Everything the guy has written is amazing. And perhaps you have tried to read Of Mice and Men. It's quite an easy reading in Portuguese. If you try to read in a translation, it's a beautiful book, very poetic, very easy to understand. But if you try to do it in English, you will notice that it's freaking tough, because it's all about Texan, you know, like local dialects, a lot of slangs, a lot of chunken and broken English, broken grammar. So it demands a lot from a foreigner. Okay, sometimes the problem, it's not in the vocabulary itself, but in the structure, in grammar, syntax. It's too complicated. It could be simple words, but organized in a way that is convoluted and messy. Okay, and sometimes it's not the language at all. It's the theme. Perhaps you're trying to read an article in astrophysics and you're not understanding much, and you think it is because it's in English, but in fact, it's because it's freaking astrophysics. I mean, of course, it's tough. Okay, so sometimes it's not so easy to spot. We understand that something is going on, but we don't really understand why we are meeting certain difficulties. And this is quite evident as well when we get to read literature, because one practical example. Last semester, we were reading Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut. Very funny book about a guy that is abducted by aliens and fights in World War II. It's super funny. And it's easy, like from the linguistic point of view, it's not so complicated. Short sentences, and normal everyday vocabulary. However, the structure of the book, it's very messy, because the book is achronologic. The book, it contradicts itself the entire time. You don't know that perhaps the guy had not even been abducted by aliens, but perhaps he's just crazy. So the structure, the literary structure, is very complex. And because of that, our students were having a kind of a hard time, you know, to get it through. But it was not because of language. It was because of the literary organization of that book. And you know, this is the entire fun. So it was challenging, but it was very, very rewarding. They all loved it. Okay, so if it's too hard, I advise you guys to try to understand it, to spot why is it. So because once you know where the difficulty lies, then you can tackle it with different strategies. Okay, another thing you may try is fiction for young adults. We all study literature at some point in our lives, at high school or at university, and often literary critics are dismissive of certain genres. Okay, they frown upon children's literature, they frown upon young adult novels, sometimes sci-fi, sometimes ghost stories, and that's a pity. Okay, we're both literary critics, so I know what I'm talking about, and we differ on that. We and many other people do not really agree with frowning upon certain genres. All genres allow for great artistry, and there are good young adult novels, and there are bad young adult novels. So you could search for the good ones, and here are a few examples. They're much easier to read. They will keep you motivated, and you know, sometimes you read them in a sitting. So these are the ones that you could point to, especially when you're struggling to solidify your habit. Okay, so just to give you a few examples: The Hobbit, Stardust by Neil Gaiman, or anything that Neil Gaiman wrote, because the guy is great. A Wrinkle in Time. All of these are books that we have read here in the book month, and The Wizard of Oz is one that we'll be reading in this semester from February onwards. Another thing you might try is using genres that are more motivating. So sci-fi, detective stories, ghost stories. They have something. They usually, these genres are based on plot. So usually ghost stories, sci-fi, and detective novels, they offer to us a nice a nice plot, a nice chain of events. We want to know what happens. We want to know who killed the main character. We want to know if that was a real ghost or it was just a hoax of some kind. So since we want to get to the end of the story, once again, you will read it for longer, you will read it more often, you will be motivated to look for certain vocabulary and for certain grammatical structures, okay? And once you learn this, you're much less likely to forget because you care about this, okay? So, and all of these are also different narratives that we have studied throughout the years. The Hunting of Hill House is one of my favorites of every time. If you haven't read it, please do. You deserve this, okay? Yeah, perhaps Santa Claus will bring you this next time for Christmas if you're a good boy or a good girl. Okay, third tip. Search for something you care about, okay? It goes into the same direction. I always advise my students, and many years ago when I used to teach Italian, I would be saying exactly the same thing to my Italian students. Use language as a means, not as an end in itself. So rather than studying English per se, try to do something that you care about. So if you love gardening, great. So get a few gardening books in English and go for it. Watch a few, I don't know, YouTube videos about the things that you like and do that in a foreign language. I guess that all of you guys already do this. So perhaps I'm stating the obvious, but when it comes to literature, that's not so clear. At least in my experience, I think it's very self-evident for you too, but not so much when we enter into the realm of books. Okay, number 4, and you guys have already realized by this point that many of these tips, they're good for reading, but they're good for life in general. Because practice makes perfect, guys. So be consistent, okay? You won't turn into Arnold Schwarzenegger into a week after you got into the gym. It will take a few years. So if you want to know about literature in general, even if you're reading in Portuguese, literature is so fast. And even a small book, like, I don't know, a book of 200 pages, it takes what, 6, 8, 10 hours to read. So how fast can you read a book that is tiny? It takes, I don't know, 2 days, a week, a month. So literature takes time. And if you want to get an extensive knowledge about Brazilian literature, for example, it takes years. Actually, it takes an entire lifetime. Okay, so we cannot, and this is only about literature. If you're trying to do that and learning foreign languages and practicing foreign languages, you really need to be consistent. Okay, so you should not give up. Perhaps if something is too hard, try to realize why. Perhaps it's, beyond your league. It's too tough for you. Your level does not allow that one, and that's okay. So you step one step further, get back a little bit, listen to the minimalists. Little less can mean more, okay? So use progressions in a smart way. For example, reading young adult novels, they offer you naturally a progression, because young adult novels, usually they have a simpler vocabulary, a simpler syntax, okay? Don't expect immediate transformation, and keep in mind that results, they may not be easy to measure, okay? I wish there was a very easy way, like that my phone, I don't know, like Apple Watch or something could tell me, today your English has improved 3%, but it's not easy to measure, okay? So, I'm a terrible singer. And when I watch people singing, I can recognize an amazing singer. When somebody who sings amazingly starts singing, I'm like, wow, she sings so well. I don't know why exactly. I don't know. I can't tell you, oh yeah, she has this technique and she has this. I don't know. But I understand that she's a freaking amazing singer. Okay, and I can distinguish between good singers and bad singers, but I don't know really why. It's precisely what we're talking about here. Results are not so easy to measure. So it really, in my experience and in the experience of many of our students, in the beginning of the semester, when you compare yourself at the beginning of the semester and then 4 or 5 months down the road, you can see a lot of progress. Okay, you can see that you're much better, but you can't really point out to what happened along the way. So keep this in mind, because it's easy to get frustrated because we are living in a world that is obsessed by statistics. You know, if you go run in the park and then Google gives you the trajectory and your speed and so much data that when you can't replicate that, like in reading, it may feel like you're stuck, and that is fair. That's unfair with our energy and our dedication. Okay, and how learning, that's how learning works. Okay, number 5. Let me see how we are with time. Okay, number 5. We have 12 of those. Okay, guys. So 5, cheat. There are plenty of sources to help you out. It's not, I really, I have one of our professors, quite old guy, could speak like at a university, could speak like 10, 11 languages or something. And he really, like, imagine trying to learn 11 languages before the internet. It's like insane. I have no idea how the guy did it. Probably he came from another planet. In our case, we have internet available, and that is so amazing. It offers us so many opportunities to cheat. Okay, so one thing that I always advise our students to do is use annotated editions. We only use here the original texts, so we're not really up to manipulations and simplifications. We don't really like that, so we go for the originals. And we always go to the complete things. I abhor, okay, I detest, I hate with all my strength abridgments. Okay, so this is it's not so common in Portuguese, but it's very common in English, that you get, like War and Peace with a huge volume like this, but then you buy it and you don't really know why, but it's like, it's just 400 pages rather than 1,500, because it's an abridged version. Okay, they do this a lot in English, like condensing and taking out chapters and paragraphs and stuff. So it happened to me already that I had the impression that I had read a certain book, and actually I hadn't, because I read an abridgment. So we only use the full-blown novels and the original texts, and therefore one great thing to use is annotated editions. For example, last semester in the intermediate course, we tried an experiment with our students, and we read The Turn of the Screw. Okay, it's very difficult. It's way beyond the intermediate level. It's from the 19th century. It's Henry James, great classic, an amazing novella, but very tough on vocabulary and very tough on syntax. Okay, some students were fainting, others were crying in class. Just joking, but it was a great experience. Everybody loved it. It was like quite challenging, but it was the good amount, the good percentage. And one of the ways that we could affront such text that was beyond our league was precisely by using an annotated edition. Okay, so then our students were reading. This is the Webner's Thesaurus edition. So you can find many literature classics. That you can find those in such editions. Not only this one, but you have like Oxford Shakespeare, for example. You find the original text by Shakespeare with annotations on what the words mean and grammar instructions and things like that. So there are many editions like those. So you have the original text here in the top, and then in this gray box at the bottom, you have synonyms and explanations of what the words means and etc. So perhaps you will be reading that my fortitude mounted afresh. And actually, you would realize that this means my courage grew once again. Well, much more palatable. But still, if I gave you my courage grew once again, it's not quite the same thing. You get the meaning, but you don't get the flavor, the 19th century flavor of the original. And that, as a literary critic, I could not do otherwise. Somebody would be like destroying my diploma somewhere in the UFPR. Okay, so this is why we always go for the original. Use annotated editions, therefore. Another possibility, many of you already do that, I'm sure. Use Kindle. Kindle is great. You can, touch the words. You get an instant English to English translation. If that's not enough, you can get it into the English to Portuguese. If that's not enough, you can go to Google Translate, which is also another great tool. Okay, one thing I do sometimes to practice German. Let's say I'm in Wikipedia for some reason. I want to read an article about Bogota, for example. I'll try it in German first. Then I understand perhaps, 60%. And then I use Google Translate to translate it to English. It's a bit broken. It's a bit weird, but it's good because it kind of replicates the structure of German. And so it helps me out. And then I go back to the German, and then it's much clearer. Okay. So you could try something similar in whatever language you're studying. Okay. Also in this direction, try using shorter text. Motivation is great. It's the name of the game in here. When we're reading in a foreign language, to be motivated and to know why you're doing it and how you do it, this is the question. Okay, so if you don't have enough time, or if you're struggling with motivation, and your worst enemy is right here, because the moment you sit down to read that book that you were waiting the entire week to do, you made your tea or your coffee, you sit down, your boyfriend or kids or wherever, they're out of the house, you have 2 hours all for yourself, and then this shit starts to scream like, come watch me, TikTok and instant messaging on WhatsApp or whatever. So if time and motivation is an issue, try something more immediately rewarding. And what we mean by that is short stories. Okay, try reading short stories. I was not a big fan before I started teaching in a book a month. I usually go for novels, my personal preference, but I've been reevaluating them, because one example on how it could help with a language. We have studied all these authors in a book a month, and with the exception of Hemingway, this guy with an amazing beard right here, I'm very jealous. Hemingway's quite easy. The language, the literary structure is much more complicated than it looks. Actually, he has virtue of looking quite simple, but actually, it's only the tip of the iceberg. But if you try to read Edgar Allan Poe, amazing writer, quite difficult, however. Okay, and the same thing applies to Herman Melville. Okay, the author of Moby Dick and stuff, and Virginia Woolf. I love them both, and we have tried a year and a half ago to read Orlando by Virginia Woolf in a book a month, and it was quite an experience. But everybody wants to do it, and I highly recommend you read her. She's amazing, but it's quite tough, and it's tough because of the language, and it's also tough because it's modernist literature at its best, which means very tough. Okay, so perhaps if you try to read Mrs. Dalloway, for example, it's too much of a challenge. It's too long. It's not so palatable. The same applies to Moby Dick. But if you try reading Melville and Virginia Woolf by using short stories, for example, stories that are 5 pages long, 10 pages long, then it's okay. Even if it takes you 10 minutes per page, in the end of an hour, you have read the whole story through. It's quite difficult. It's quite different than if you had Moby Dick, because perhaps in the end of an hour, you read 5 pages of Moby Dick and you still have another, I don't know, 5,000 more to go or something. Okay, which is also an amazing book, really. Moby Dick, amazing. Please read it before you die. Okay. Yeah. So number 7, you can try the short stories. Number 7, work on what you need rather than what you feel like. Okay. I've taken classes of dancing for a few years, and one of my teachers would always say this, because you're good on certain things, and therefore those things are pleasurable because you're good. The challenge is to feel pleasure when you suck. Okay, when you try to, you're awful at soccer, you're terrible, you're the worst. Therefore, I doubt that you will wake up one morning and say, you know what, this Sunday, I will just play soccer the entire day. It's very unlikely that this will happen, because if you're bad at it, you probably won't do it. And since you won't do it, it means you're bad at it, so you get into a vicious cycle. And that applies to life in general, but also to foreign languages, of course. So practice on what you need rather than what you feel like it. This is much more difficult. It's much easier said than done. Okay. One thing that I advise, for example, for vocabulary, is to practice spacious repetition. I don't know if you guys know what this is. There are certain apps that, for example, you're reading a book in English and you've met this word, obnoxious. And then you're like, obnoxious, what the hell is that? So you look, and then you type this. You open this app and then you type there, obnoxious. And then you've learned that, oh, okay, it's weird and uncommon, exotic, whatever. And then you put it there. And these apps, once in a while, they will just throw you the meaning. Okay, so they'll just you're using your telephone and then just like swiping up in TikTok, and then boom, suddenly it will give you the meaning, and it will appear in your screen, and in this way you will withhold information for much longer. Okay, it will be easier to memorize. You can use this to study language, but also to study, I don't know, anatomy or whatever. Okay, you can create your own flashcards. I haven't done this, but I've met once a polyglot that could speak over 10 languages. And the guy was, and I'm not joking, this is real, the guy was copying the Plato's dialogues in ancient Greek by hand. Okay, so he was like, he was studying ancient Greek, and he had the Plato's dialogues all about Socrates and stuff, and he was like copying it, the entire dialogues, by hand as a way to practice his Greek. Okay, quite extreme. I was like, well, still nowadays I'm still puzzled by this, but it's something that you're using your motor skills. You're using an entire different regions of the brain, different sets of skills in your service. Okay, so it's not the easiest strategy, but it's possible. And I'm giving this example just for you guys to get the idea that you can get creative. Okay, you can invent your own techniques, and like this guy clearly did, because it would not come naturally to me. Let me just copy out War and Peace by Tolstoy in my head. It means it's quite crazy. Okay. Yes, Anna.
To share a quick tip. If you are Kindle users, Kindle does have a tool to create your own flashcards. You can just like click on the word that you're going to select, and then you can add it to your personal account. I have actually done a reel about it a while ago. I can reshare it tonight because I teach you how to do it on your Kindle, right? So it helps a lot, right? With foreign languages, it's never enough to repeat, and also to test yourself, right? To be able to see if you can remember the meaning. Yes.
Okay. We're almost there, guys. So number 8, did the slide change for you guys? Yeah, did it change? Okay. Another possibility, read more than once, okay? You can absorb so much in a second reading. I don't do it a lot, I have to confess, but many of our students do with very good results. So it's not very much my personal style, but I do think that's something that is really, really worthy of trying. If you don't want to read the book twice, perhaps it's a short story, for example, it's easier. But because, you know, on the first reading, you don't know what is going to happen. You don't know the style, the story, characters, whatever. Once after you read it, you know everything that is about to happen. Therefore, your absorption will be and your fixing of structures and vocabulary and cultural elements will be much greater and much more nuanced. Okay, you may try, if you don't want to read everything for a second turn, you may try dynamic reading. Okay, so you just like reread it quite fast, you know, like just shifting your eyes through the page, as we do sometimes in, you know, when you're scrolling in Facebook or when you're looking for some information in a website that you're not really reading everything, but you're like trying to read key sentences and trying to spot the most important information. You can try to do that, the same thing. Another possibility to use audiobooks instead. I'm going to talk more about that on a moment, but I'm a great fan, and I've this is something I use a lot. Okay, so for example, 2 or 3 years ago, I was reading Sherlock Holmes in German as a way of practicing, and I was listening to the audiobook in English. Okay, so I was reading in German and then listening in English because my German is not good, and I was I slowed the reading. It was like in Nemo, like this, okay? Because I cannot read German too fast, so I needed a slower English version in my ear. And therefore I was reading German, not really understanding much, or understanding perhaps 60%, which is not enough for me to understand the story, and listening to the audiobook, and therefore grasping the words and the sentences and everything. Okay, so this is a very interesting strategy. Or you can try the movies, or you can try a graphic novel, whatever, anything that will help you absorb it better. So different people learn in different ways, and therefore you should be looking to what's best for your style of learning, your personal interests, and your general mood, because also in different points in life we try to approach learning via different paths. Okay, for example, if you're in the end of the semester loaded with so many things in university or at work or whatever, it's unlikely that you want to read a book twice just to practice your English. So perhaps you could try to read the graphic novel for a second reading, or perhaps try second book by the same author, or watching the movie. Something that happens a lot with our students. Last semester, we read The Hours by Michael Cunningham. And then there's the movie, right? The very nice movie with Nicole Kidman, perhaps. And well, I'm terrible with name of actors and actresses, but I don't know, 3 very famous women actresses. And so many of our students were reading the novel and then watching the movie and then commenting on the differences, etc. Okay, and you could do even the opposite, watching the movie first and going to the novel later, things like that. Okay, no, Nicole Kidman. Yeah, is it that? Okay, anyway. So another thing that our students do quite frequently. 2 years ago, Anna was teaching Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. This is Alice in Wonderland is part 1. So Alice Through the Looking Glass is part 2. Okay, and perhaps you're like, what, through the looking glass? You kind of understand looking, you kind of understand glass, or not kind of, you do understand looking, you do understand glass, but looking glass, well, usually we're more familiar with the word mirror, right? The word looking glass is an older word to say mirror. So that's why immediately when you get to Alice através do espelho, immediately you get this kind of comparison that you get to a second reading. And nobody said that the second reading had to be in the same language, okay? So this is something that happens with a particular student. He was having difficulties with the book. It's more challenging than you might expect. And therefore he read it first in Portuguese, and then he came back to the English version and read it for the second time in English, and then it was smooth, because yes, there were linguistic challenges, but at least the literary challenges were already dealt with, so it was much easier, and also to guess what words meant and what certain structures meant, etc. Okay. Another possibility, discuss. Debating is really one of the best ways of studying literature. At least that's my personal opinion and my experience as a teacher. I've always been the kind of reader that wants to discuss books with other people, and my friends have suffered a lot because of that. Because if I'm reading something nice, I will have to tell you, okay, you will have to prove your loyalty and your friendship by listening. Some people want to talk about their girlfriends or about their problems. I want to talk about literature. So discussing and joining book clubs may really be a great way to not only to develop your interpretation skills and your rationale for literature in general, but also it offers you these secondary advantages, which are pretty awesome. That is, you have to debate, and you have to use your reading in English to practice conversation, right? And so this is pretty cool, and this will give you social exchange, which is something, we have all of us, we've been through the lockdown, and we have all had we have all witnessed the effect that lacking social connections, the effect that it has in our lives. So one way of tackling that is precisely discussing literature. And one great thing is that when you start to explain your ideas and your interpretations, you realize many things that you had not realized before. You know so much more than you know that you know. Quite a complex sentence, but it makes sense. It makes sense. Okay, you know so much more that you know that you know. Okay, going further.
Right. So to say something about discussing books in group, like how often do you find a wide group of people reading the same book or the same short story as you are reading at the moment? It's rare, people, unless we are talking about very famous novels, like usually contemporary novels that have been just launched and caught the attention of the public. For example, last year with Torturado, right, which was a great novel that everybody was reading at the same time and commenting about it. It's pretty rare for you to find out a group of people that is reading the same thing as you. So the one thing, I think that's the number one benefit of it, is just like being able to talk to people that actually know what you're talking about when you express your emotions concerning that specific novel, or when you want to discuss that specific character, and then bring some of your comments to discussion. So I think it's a win-win situation, right?
Okay, guys, I'll speak for only 10 minutes more, and then I'll answer to questions, and Anna can comment if you guys have any suggestions, criticism, or whatever. Okay, number 10, listen to audiobooks. Okay, I know many people have not tried. Many people have tried and did not like it. but I do warmly suggest you to give it another try if you don't like it. And if you didn't, try it, because I find audiobooks amazing, amazing. I love them, not only because they save you time for we all have to do from time to time boring stuff. You have to go to the Detran to make your to get your driver's license once again, and then you'll be for like 2 hours waiting. Perhaps you cannot really bring a book along, so you can listen to an audiobook, or you have to do the dishes. And trust me, once you start loving audiobooks, the dishes will never be the same again. Here, we fight to know who, no, I'm doing the dishes. You did it last time. Get out of it. It's exactly like this, because doing the dishes is perfect. It's perfect time for audiobook. Okay. So it saves a lot of time, but also it adds another layer of possibilities. Certain narratives do not fit well with audiobooks, because they are too complex, too experimental. Mrs. Dalloway, for example, by Virginia Woolf, it's very complicated. So it's complicated if you're reading. Sometimes you have to go back some pages and read a few things back again. Then you're like, okay, so this person is that person. Then you go forward again. So it's complicated. So it's better for reading. If you try to listen to it, you're likely to get lost. However, there are certain other narratives, they get enriched when you try listening audiobooks. And I can give you 2 examples. I have spoken about The Hunting of Hill House, right? It's a ghost story. And I've listened to the audiobook. So I read it with my ears, okay? And it was amazing, because, they put in the music, they create the ambiance, and some please pardon my French, but one day I was like shitting myself over like listening to the audiobook at 2 a.m. I was like, wow, it's very, very scary, precisely because you have all the sound effects and the voices and everything. So it's pretty cool. It's like watching Netflix without the images, okay? And with very good high quality text. So it was great. Another example is when you get regional dialects, okay? So if you're reading Of Mice and Men by Steinbeck, which I've mentioned before, it's very cool to get, someone with a Texan accent reading, like getting you into the mood, getting into the feeling. A few years ago, I've listened to Their Eyes Were Watching God, for example, by Zora Neale Hurston. And she's an Afro-American from the South, writing in the 1930s, and she's all about like regional black dialects, and it's amazing. Like sometimes a little bit difficult to understand, but it gives you so much flavor. And sometimes when you're reading Machado de Assis, for example, I read it when I was at high school, and then when I got to university, the first semester, one of my professors in my very first discipline of literary theory in university, and the professor was talking about, because Machado is he's a master of irony. It's so funny, and I was like, what? Funny? Like really? No, Cosmo, funny? What the hell? And yeah, once because it's difficult sometimes to spot the sarcasm, the irony when it's just written, but when friends are being sarcastic, instinctively, because you get the tone of voice, you get the speed in which they speak, you get there are so many things, the pronunciation, everything. They give you little tips on if they're being serious or not, if they're being playful or not. And this also is true about audiobooks. Okay, so yeah, they save you a lot of time, and they really add up your reading. Number 11, enjoy the challenge. Okay, it requires a lot of active effort. Please don't think that I'm saying that if you're basic 1 in Turkish, and then just start reading, and at some point, or just start watching Turkish series in Netflix, and after 378 episodes, you'll be a fluent speaking Turkish fluently. That's not what I'm saying. Okay? It will help, definitely. You'll learn a thing or two, but it will not get you into a fluent speaker unless you are a child up to 6 or 7 years old. Then probably it will be your case. You will learn Turkish. But if you're an adult, forget it. Okay. But learning languages require an active effort. And so if we can meet a perspective, if we can develop perspective that gets pleasure and excitement out of this effort, okay, you know, a struggle doesn't have to be bad. And for example, many of you have hold degrees in universities, for example, and I'm sure it has been tough. Or you can think about some of the things that you value the most in life. They are valuable precisely because they were difficult to get, you know. So there is a high value and of you know, positive and pleasurable things into effort. And this is something we have to think actively about when we're studying something with our might. And this could be foreign languages, this could be mathematics, could be anything. Okay. Above all, okay, keep calm and read on. Everything will be fine in the end. So very briefly, another 5 minutes and I'm done, to explain to you guys how does a book a month work. Many of you guys already know it. Fast, if you guys, we offer 2 different types of courses: novels, in which we read a book a month. So there you go, that's the name of the school. Or we read short stories, okay? It depends which one is the best for you. It depends on how much you would like to read, how much time you have at your disposal, okay? Another thing you should consider is how often you would like to come to classes. Because we have certain courses are on a weekly basis. So you have classes every Thursday or every Wednesday, and other courses are bi-weekly. So you have classes this week, and then the next one you're off, and then you're on again, and then you're off again, and then therefore you go. Okay. Once you've decided on those 2 things, you can decide what is the course for you. We in the novels course, this is the reading list for the intermediate. We offer it in 2 levels, intermediate and advanced, and we're thinking about linguistics basically. So we're looking for a more simpler vocabulary and simpler grammar, but not necessarily simpler literature. Okay, so it's also high value and very artistic as well. We usually organize our courses by themes. So this time we'll be talking about happiness, the happy days, and whatever that means. And so we'll start with the Wizard of Oz, a great allegory of life in general, of searches and etc. We all know the story, the Yellow Brick Road, and so on. We'll read then Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, a great Nobel Prize, a German writer, but we read it in translation. This is something about a book a month. We read mostly texts in English, but or originally written in English, but we often every now and then try authors from different languages because they have very high quality. So Siddhartha is about Buddhism. It's based on the life of Buddha. It's a very poetic novel, very highly spiritual. Then we'll move into Camus, the great philosopher of the 20th century, the stranger, o estrangeira in Portuguese, and it's actually about the lack of happiness, or rather than being about the happy days, right? Then a great classic of the 19th century, actually the early 20th century, The Secret Garden, okay, which has been turned into uncountable movies and yeah, so many adaptations. And finally, my favorite of these ones, John Steinbeck, The Canary Row. Okay, a great novel about friendship, about a group of friends that try to throw a surprise party, and end up destroying everything. So it's a little bit like Se Viver Não Case, but literary version. Okay, so yeah, in the advanced course, we'll be talking about one of our favorite actions in life, which is traveling. Okay, I guess that many of you would agree. And this one, we've put up a few heavyweights, heavy champions together. Okay, so we start with Ernest Hemingway, perhaps his masterpiece, The Sun Also Rises. Then we'll move into Jack Kerouac's The Dharma Bums. Kerouac is quite famous for On the Road, right? This one is the sequel. Okay, so On the Road is a bit too long for our purposes, so we decided to get this is the sequel. It's about two friends that are hitchhiking together. They go on trekking and mountain climbing and everything. It's quite interesting. They're talking a lot about life and stuff. Then The Great Discovery of the Semester, Pearl S. Buck, amazing writer that won the Nobel and the Pulitzer. Okay, so perhaps the two biggest prizes in literature. She won both of them, and for whatever reason, she's not as well known as she deserves. We will read East Wind, West Wind, one of her earlier novels, and it's quite short, so about 120 pages long. Then we'll move into sci-fi, Ursula Le Guin, The Left Hand of Darkness, a very interesting narrative about a planet in which there is no gender. Everybody is male and female, not exactly hermaphrodite. It's not exactly the idea. The idea is that all individuals can become pregnant, and this changes society in such a crazy way. So you're reading about aliens that can get pregnant, every single one of them, and it's pretty crazy, and it's a total masterpiece. So it reads like the work of an anthropologist. It's very, very interesting. And then we move into Salman Rushdie, an author that has won every major literary prize. Is still alive, 85, up and going. And this is called Harun and the Sea of Stories, a very funny book, quite complicated, but it's a young adult novel and loosely based on the 1001 Nights. He's Indian. He was born and raised in India. So this is also something we try to do here, to approach not English literature, but literature in English. That's totally different. Okay, it doesn't look as much, right? But it's a very big difference. And finally, in the short stories course, we do not really organize this course thematically. But we try to offer a mosaic of different authors. So you know, it's like in a banquet. You can try a little bit of everything. So we will be reading a lot of. We try to focus more on female writers, so women writers, and we'll be starting with Kate Chopin, a great writer from the U.S., Agatha Christie, then Eileen Chang, one of the best in Chinese literature in the 20th century, Herman Melville, then Alice Walker, the author of The Color Purple, has won major literary prizes and she's still alive. H.P. Lovecraft, the master of horror, Cthulhu, I'm looking to you. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, okay, very interesting author of the 19th century, early feminist, etc. Virginia Woolf, does not require an introduction, and Thomas Mann, okay, a little bit of German authors in here, Nobel Prize, and as we all know, he's almost incapable of writing short stuff. So we really, you know, like the Magic Mountain, Dr. Faustus, Joseph and his brothers, everything is like higher than my arm. So yeah, we could find a little some shorter texts, and we will be exploring those. The short stories course is only weekly, and then the novels course in the advanced is only once every 2 weeks, but in the intermediate you can choose if you want to do it weekly or once every 2 weeks. It depends on you. Okay, it depends on how much English you want to practice. I think that's all, guys. I'll just jump this because I don't want to take too much of your time. Another thing that you could try is to stack habits. Okay, if you like getting your coffee in the morning, you may try getting the coffee and reading at the same time. So you stack, you know, you pile up your habits. This helps a lot sometimes. Yes, Anna.
just a comment that it came to me right now because earlier today I responded a comment on our Instagram about this. Was this girl asking if by any chance we offer certificates in our courses, right? And we do, right? And this is something that you can also use in order to prove your extracurricular activities in the university. So usually how we do it, which I think is very fair to do it. I've learned to compute the hours, the amount of hours that we dedicate into a course like this when I was studying in England, which is we not only compute the time that we are in class, but also the time that you dedicate into reading, right? Because it's a lot. You be probably dedicating, I don't know, 10 hours of your time, 6 hours of your time. So this should be computed throughout the semester. And then by the end of the course, of the 5-month course, if you do it the whole period, then you will earn 60-hour certificate, right? Which is a lot. It's equivalent for you to doing like a discipline in university. So sometimes it counts for you. I don't know if you're still doing your degree, but if it does, then it's good for you to prove your extracurricular hours. And also you can include these on your lattice curriculum, right? If you are in the academic side. Yeah, so it helps a lot.
Okay, to finish, a few practical, if you might be considering joining us, if we'll have this honor. Here are some practical information. So the schedule of which courses are happening when, okay? So on Tuesday, every Tuesday, short stories. Every Wednesday, there's one version of the novels intermediate. And then on Thursdays, you have bi-weekly. On 1 week, you may choose from novels intermediate or novels advanced bi-weekly. And also on Saturday afternoons, we also offer it bi-weekly. So two Saturdays a month, you'll be spending your afternoon with us. When you're having classes weekly, classes are shorter. They last for an hour and a half. When it's only when it takes 2 weeks, classes are longer. So we do actually 2 pieces of 1 hour and 15. So you commit to 2 hours and a half actually. So yeah, you decide if you prefer shorter classes often or less often, but longer ones. Okay. These are the prices. Okay. We have a few different types of packages if you want to, different prices of courses, and one of them is the free access to everything all the time. So you can find all of these in our Instagram and everything. And about the start of the classes, we start all of them in February. On the 7th, we start with Kate Chopin, the short stories, with the Wizard of Oz in the novels intermediate, either on the 8th or on the 9th. It depends if it's weekly or bi-weekly. And in the novels advanced, either on the 11th or on the 16th, if it's on Thursday or on Saturday, we'll be discussing The Sun Also Rises. Okay, so at the bottom line, if you guys are joining us, we promise you 2 things: lots of learning, both in literature and language, but also a lot of fun. Okay, thank you so much, guys, and please speak. And if you have any questions or any advice, we are here. Thank you so much for your attention.
Questions at all, people?
I do have a question. I don't know how to raise my hand anymore in here. But I've read that audio is a huge specialist on humanidades médicas. É assim, né? Isso. And I
Medical humanities, yeah.
Yes, and I teach for medical students, and we focus on academic reading. And I'm sorry, I was in a parents-teachers meeting, and I got a little late. So I'm not sure if any of the first tips could help me on that, but if you had anything on that, it would be great.
Tips on academic reading?
Academic reading, yes.
No, good question. Yeah. Well, grasping the terminology certainly helps, right? So yeah, I would say this is key. I use a lot of Google Translate because it translates quite well academic stuff, right? Google has a little bit more difficulties with colloquial language. So weirdly enough, the simpler it gets, sometimes it gets fuzzy. But in German, I use it a lot. I don't read a lot of academic German, but I do read a lot of academic Italian. And academic Italian is very complicated. In English, academic English phrases, short sentences, like they repeat a lot. Italian is the complete opposite. They love, like this very complicated, like, a lot of, you stack 5 sentences, one inside the other, and those Russian dolls that, this is how they write in Italian. It's beautiful. It's amazing, but it's quite complicated to get. And so sometimes I do use that just to ping pong to see if I'm getting it correctly. What else? I'll think about it a little bit more, and if something comes to mind, I'll let you know.
And I'm gonna be your student with the advanced novels. So if
Awesome.
any Saturday you remember something like that, I'm up here.
That's great. Thank you so much.
People, just one thing that also can help, not specifically with medical humanities, but with specific terms. Whatever helps me when I am translating some text, or if I want to search for a specific terminology of a specific area, usually I Google the term in Portuguese, I access the page on Wikipedia, and then I choose the language that I want to get the translation to, because then you're sure going to be getting the official name of it, right? Because Wikipedia is thoroughly edited. I think in Brazil we still need to improve it, but in other languages like in German, like in English, in French, we always have maintenance of experts and academics who do that. So you can usually trust it. So it's a good tip as well.
Anything else, guys? For those that are going, thank you so much for your presence. Okay, please go. No hard feelings. But if you have any other questions, please let us know. I could not follow the chat while I was speaking, but I saw that it was like going wild, like 80 something comments. Yes, Anna, go ahead.
Just if you could talk about the apps to do like spacious vocabulary, like you keep repeating it. I gave some recommendation, but as I don't use it that often, so maybe if you remember, do you have any apps, any website? I suggested Quizlet and vocabulary.com, but I'm not sure if you have any others.
Someone asked in the chat if if you have access to the recording. You do. We have a page on YouTube for a book a month, and it will be there. Okay, so if you want to share these with someone, you can also do it. And rewatch it later on. Okay, guys, and I think is that all? Any other questions? No? Okay. So thank you very much for joining us. Actually, there is one. If the short stories course is to any level, yes, it is for both the intermediate up from intermediate onwards, right? Yes, Anna, go ahead.
So sorry, I am struggling with both the to keep the phones and using the microphone. So the thing is, the short stories, it's a multi-level group, right? So to achieve like this multi-level group, I teach short stories, right? So this is what I'm telling you. I use the multi-level method, which is I usually group people who have like different levels, some advanced, some intermediate, mostly because one helps the other, right? So sometimes the doubt of the intermediate student is also the same doubt of the advanced. So it should be corrected even if it's in a later stage of the learning process, and vice versa. Usually, if you are studying with more advanced students, it's never a competition. It's always a safe space. Everybody respects itself. Nobody makes fun of anyone. And usually people help each other, right? So help with pronunciation, they help with sharing their sources of better learning. So it's always good to be in contact with people that are a little bit ahead of you. And I say that to myself, like when I did that course of German that I mentioned to you, I was having classes with a boy and he was super good in German. Sometimes I would feel like, am I ever going to be in his level? But then I think because of him, I got really motivated into improving and to see the stage where I could, what I could become and what I could achieve by the end of the course, right? So it's really good. It helps a lot. But if you're intermediate on, then you're on.
Yeah, we're really for horizontal learning. You know, this is something we discuss a lot with our students. Learning is not something that you should give it for granted and that you should receive entirely ready. Actually, learning is it's a process that goes both way, and students are also responsible for their own learning. And what I mean is, you have to realize what your difficulties are and how you tackle them. And one of the great things about a book a month is that we keep the groups small, and we are quite close with our students, and so you have free direct access to us, and we can give you tips, you know, outside of classes, like try this, try that. Some students in the intermediate level sometimes wish to get classes on the side. We do not really do that. Like, we're not teaching language anymore. We did that for many years, but we're not doing any longer. So we do know a lot of extremely efficient and skilled professionals that we could we could put you in contact with them, and they could work in tandem alongside with a book a month. It is a great combination. One day I hope to find exactly this for German, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Take German classes on the side and be reading like crazy in German version of ein Buch, ein Monat in German, auf Deutsch. Und dann I will speak finally this crazy language. Okay? Yep. Okay, guys, I think so. I think that's it. We've promised that the class would last until it would last for an hour and a half. We started with 5 minutes delay, so we're delivering exactly 1 hour and a half. Okay, thank you so much for your presence and for your trust, and hope to see you again anytime soon in our classes or in the open classes. Okay, all the best, guys. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. So I'll keep you posted, okay? See you. Bye-bye.